Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We're on day 27 of the government shutdown, as over 1 million federal employees are now losing their paychecks. And these aren't wealthy lawmakers we're talking about here. These are normal, everyday Americans, many of whom are living paycheck to paycheck. According to the Bipartisan Policy Center, around 730,000 federal employees are now working for free, while around 670,000 are on furlough. And even though federal workers have traditionally received their back pay after the shutdown ends, the White House is weighing the possibility of not providing back pay to its furloughed employees. Those who are being affected the most by this government shutdown are the poor. Consider, for example, what's going on for Cumberland County in North Carolina. 33,000 households are set to have their food and nutritional services disrupted or delayed in November, which is 1 in 4 households throughout the county. 12,000 women who are either pregnant or mothers of infants will lose their access to food through WIC. Assistance for heating bills are going to stop in December. And there are also going to be cuts in Medicaid payments. And that's just one county in one state. Imagine these numbers spread throughout the entire nation. It's notable how the way the Trump administration so easily cut off aid to the poor abroad is now being paralleled in the way they're cutting it off to the poor in the U.S. It's almost as if the way we treat our neighbors is the way we treat ourselves, and the way we treat ourselves is the way we treat our neighbors. But in the meantime, while the Trump administration is abandoning millions of poor people, they're plowing ahead with the demolition of the East Wing of the White House and Trump's plans to build an exorbitant ballroom. Originally, Trump claimed his plans wouldn't touch the current building.
It won't interfere with the current building. It'll be near it, but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of. It's my favorite place. I love it.
Notice how he paired his promise that it wouldn't touch the current building with the claim that, therefore, it pays total respect to the existing building. This is part of the problem with the current dialogue about the project. Democrats are claiming it's being disrespectful to the current building, while Republicans are acting shocked and claiming that's ridiculous. Well, if it's so ridiculous to claim it feels disrespectful to the current building to see the White House demolished to the ground, then why did Trump say he would pay total respect to the existing building by not touching it? Those were the expectations and the lines that the Trump administration were using and setting up. As usual, Republicans are just doing whatever they want and making up whatever line of reasoning suits their entitled impulse decisions along their way. While plans for any remodeling work are typically submitted to the National Capital Planning Commission prior to demolition, Trump decided to go ahead with the full demolition anyway, thanks to his advisors telling him he can do whatever he wants. While meeting with donors for the new ballroom on October 15th, Trump said, quote, "I said, how long will it take me? Sir, you can start tonight. You have no approvals. I said, you've got to be kidding. They said, sir, this is the White House. You're the President of the United States. You can do anything you want." And that's precisely the problem here. Trump can do whatever he wants because nobody is holding him accountable for anything. It's like how Trump often says he was right about everything. Of course, that's total nonsense, but all that matters is that he was right about one thing. He was right when he said, I could shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. It's like incredible. So when Trump first starts demolition, his supporters say he's only touching one small section. Then, when he demolishes the entire East Wing, his supporters say, well, Obama demolished an entire part of the White House to build a basketball court. It's part of a post that's being shared among MAGA voters that shows a black and white photo of a demolition going on at the White House with the caption, quote, "This is an absolute horrible tragedy to the White House, literally tearing down a section to... Oh, my bad, this picture is when Obama wrecked the White House to put up an indoor basketball court using taxpayer money. My president builds a ballroom to host world leaders. Your president built a basketball court to host Diddy and LeBron. We are not the same." Unquote. But that's not true. The picture in the post is actually from 1934. That's why it's black and white. It's from when FDR did a West Wing expansion project. What Obama actually did was that he repurposed the White House tennis courts so they could also be used to play basketball on. Then he invited wounded warrior players to the White House to play basketball in their wheelchairs.
We're at the White House, and we're here to play basketball. Teach the president a couple things about wheelchair basketball. This is the president's personal invitation.
Well, let's see what we got out here. Look at this. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, we're from Walter Reed, and they needed the best guys in the business.
But the second one always goes in.
On behalf of the Wounded Warrior Regiment, the Colonel and the Sergeant Major here, and all the Wounded Warriors that we have here, I would like to present to you a plaque.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you having us here.
Oh, listen, that's
taking
beautiful.
the time.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
This will go up in my office.
And we also
And you got the ball?
have a basketball, so it's worth a lot of money because it's been signed by all these Marines.
It is.
So I'm sure.
Here, I promise not to sell it on eBay.
Sure. And the last thing we have here, sir, 2 jerseys here for you and your wife, sir.
Thank you so much.
The number 1 is for the wife.
Fantastic. He's right about that. He's right about that. Well, thank you so much, guys. This is beautiful. This means a lot. Thank you.
Teaching them recreation, this type of recreation not only builds their energy and their strength, but it also does a lot of mental, having a mental effect, a positive effect on them, so that they'll go out and do something else.
Anytime you guys want to come down and play, feel free. All right? Appreciate it. This is wonderful. This is by far the best part of my day right here. Thank you, guys.
Oh, for the days when the White House put out videos like that. Instead, now our government is putting out videos like this.
American dominance, reclaiming our seats. From the ashes we rise. The warning is clear. Cross the line and your end is near. No more speaking softly, just a big stick. America's back and we're not taking shit. Eagles soar and cannons roar. America's might now restored. Freedom rings forevermore. Stand and fight. Department of War.
When Obama was a candidate, he did mention taking out the bowling alley and putting in a basketball court. But then when he was elected, he decided to keep the bowling alley anyway. Additionally, Republicans and Fox News hosts have tried to defend Trump's demolishing of the entire East Wing by claiming that Obama spent $376 million on White House renovations during his presidency. But what they aren't mentioning is that the money was approved by Congress in 2008 during the Bush administration. So again, this is a totally different situation to Trump unilaterally demolishing things. So there's one thing that was true in the post being shared by Republicans. It's the final line. We are not the same. Another false comparison that Republicans have brought up is that they're claiming Trump demolishing the East Wing of the White House is just like Democrats taking down Confederate statues. Senator Josh Hawley said, quote, "I didn't hear a whole lot of concern about our history when my colleagues were applauding all those rioters tearing down statues and rewriting our history books. So I think the concern about the facade of the East Wing is maybe a little rich." Well, first of all, even if you call them rioters, rioters don't write history books. And also, consider what you're saying here. Confederate statues glorify those who fought for slavery. And they're placed in areas where descendants of slaves have to see them. We should not be honoring those who fought for slavery by making statues in their honor and making the descendants of slaves constantly see them as they're driving around town. And while the Democrats favor taking down statues that honor those who fought for the right to own slaves, Trump took down 6 trees on the White House grounds, 2 of which were historic magnolia trees, and the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden, which was originally installed in 1903, And this is after paving over the Rose Garden. Again, there's a major difference between taking down stone statues meant to honor those who fought for slavery and taking down historic trees and gardens. And sure, people cut down trees and rip out bushes all the time. But everyone knows there are certain trees and gardens that have a more special, perhaps even sacred meaning to people. And it's disrespectful to just rip them out. The whole thing feels reminiscent of a story from the 8th century in a German town of what is now called Hesse. A pagan community at the time had a sacred tree that was named Donner's Oak. But then along came the Christians, who decided to chop down the tree, and who used the wood to build themselves a church. Rather than caring for their neighbors, they demolished a living tree that was sacred to their neighbors in order to build something for themselves. And now there's a worship song that's being sung in churches of the New Christendom movement today in honor of those Christians. Here's audio of the song being led by Joshua Hames, who was on staff at Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship, where Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, was a member of prior to his move to Washington.
Well, we'll be sharpening the axe to cut down O'Connor's road. We'll be sharpening the axe to cut down O'Connor's road. We'll be sharpening the axe to cut down O'Connor's road. For the Lord he's stronger far, and we all belong to Jerusalem above. We all belong to Jerusalem above. We all belong to Jerusalem above. And we sail for Eden's shores. And we'll sail for Eden's shores. And we'll sail for Eden's shores.
Another issue here is the cost involved. Just as Trump couldn't keep his story straight about the extent of the demolition, he also keeps changing the cost.
It's about $200 million. It's going to be a couple of $100 million at least. I think it'll cost $250 million. It's about $300 million.
Have you raised the full $300 million needed to fund your ballroom? And how much specifically are you donating to
Actually,
this
we've
construction
raised, I think,
project?
$350 million. All donor money and money that we put up. We've raised. It's going to be. It's going to cost right in the neighborhood of $300 million. It's been expanded and made absolutely. It'll be the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world, I think.
Of course, to this, Republicans dismiss any concerns because, as they say, it's all privately funded and won't cost the taxpayer a dime. But who is it being funded by? Fortune magazine published an article on Sunday titled, "Meet All 37 White House Ballroom Donors Funding the $300 Million Build, Including Silicon Valley Tech Giants, Crypto Bros, and the Letniks." I'll link to the piece in my Substack that I sent out for this episode. The donations are coming from a combination of 21 corporate donors and 16 private donors. The corporate donors include the likes of Meta, Apple, Amazon, Google, and Lockheed Martin. In fact, Lockheed Martin is a defense contractor who has taken in $33.4 billion in contracts with the Trump administration this year alone. Also, Microsoft, Comcast, Altria, Coinbase, and Palantir Technologies. You may be familiar with the name Palantir if you've followed stories about what the Trump administration is doing by increasing federal surveillance programs. I could continue, but the point is that these are all massive companies that are receiving billions of dollars in contracts from Trump. As Bernie Sanders posted on X over the weekend, quote, "This year, Trump's big beautiful bill gave Google an $18 billion tax break, Amazon a $16 billion tax break, Microsoft a $12 billion tax break, Facebook an $11 billion tax break. Now they're writing checks to Trump for his $300 million ballroom? Gee, I wonder why." And that's the thing. None of us will ever get invited to that ballroom because it's not meant for us. It's meant for the oligarchs. And that's the heart of the problem here. In a piece published Sunday night for Baptist News Global, Mark Wingfield wrote, quote, "President Donald Trump's abrupt elimination of U.S. aid already has caused 400,000 deaths globally and will cause 14 million deaths by 2030, according to the president of the hunger advocacy group Bread for the World," unquote. And that doesn't even include the poor in the United States who are losing their paychecks. their funding for food, or their health care. So here was what Pete Buttigieg had to say.
Speaking of demolishing, the White House right now, literally, the East Wing is being demolished. What do you make of that?
Well, my focus right now isn't about historic preservation. It's about what's going on in people's lives. And what's most wrong about what President Trump is doing to the White House grounds is it shows that his focus is on building a bigger venue for fancy dinners, when because of his actual policies, Americans are opening those letters and finding out this week that they're not going to be able to afford their health care next year. How in the world could you be focused on building a new ballroom, literally a gilded ballroom for fancy parties for your rich friends, at the exact moment when working Americans, actually disproportionately working Americans who voted for you, are getting screwed by your health care policy, and you don't seem to be interested in helping them?
I mean, he would say it's for the American people, and it's the people's house, and it's good to be able to have this sort of space.
And most of the people who are getting these letters about their health care premiums are never going to be invited to dinner at the White House. He's not there for them.
So why does Trump want to do all this? According to a report from ABC News over the weekend, quote, senior administration officials told ABC News that some in the administration were already referring to it as the President Donald J. Trump Ballroom, and that name was likely to stick. But thankfully, after a public outcry, Trump said he was probably going to call it the Presidential Ballroom or something like that, unquote. All of this reminds me of another story about powerful people building something for themselves. In fact, you can read about it in Genesis 11. It says, quote, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. As is typically the case, when it comes to the Tower of Babel, conservative white evangelicals tend to miss the plot. They make this a story about the origin of human languages, which of course is laughable to those who study how languages have evolved over time. But when you remember that Genesis was written by a people who experienced the wound of exile at the hand of empire, specifically the Babylonian Empire, it makes a lot more sense. The story invokes the image of the Tower of Babylon that is extended into the realm of the gods in order to make a name for its builders. Imagine how that might make people feel who are being dominated by the tower builders. Imagine how liberating it might feel to those under the boot of empire to hear a story that even the tower-building empire might be scattered. If the Tower of Babel is meant to be a story about how languages are formed, then it's demonstrably false and makes no sense of the world we live in. But if the Tower of Babylon is meant to be a political statement about the Babylonian Empire and a promise that God would scatter them into exile for trying to make a name for themselves, then it makes all the sense in the world of how empires and patriarchy works. And it gives hope for those who are considered nameless that someday the towers will fall. I wrote a story about this for Baptist News Global back on September 15th, 2022. It was titled, The Biblical View from the Tower of Babel. I'd like to close the episode today by reading one section of that article, beginning with the heading, Interpretations of Babel from Below. And the reason I think it's so important to do this is because we need to begin thinking about projects like these, Trump's Ballroom, and all of these different things that the oligarchs are doing, not from the perspective of people that are rather well-to-do, but from the perspective of those on the underside of the empire who are losing their money for food, their money for healthcare, and losing their lives, quite frankly. So here's the closing section of my piece, Interpretations of Babel from Below. The question for interpreting passages like the Tower of Babel isn't whether our lens is shaped by our own questions, but to what degree we're aware of the questions we approach the text with. The questions we ask are shaped very much by our social location in the world. As we see illustrated in the ancient Near East and in the Hebrew Bible, the questions that empires ask are different than the questions those in exile ask. The questions of exiles are different from the questions of those returning from exile. And the questions of modern readers are shaped by our own power dynamics and social locations. In fact, even the responses to Ari Lamb's thread about Babel were shaped by the lenses of those responding. Unfortunately, most of the theological conversation taking place to conservative evangelicalism in the United States today is formed by white men at the top of evangelicalism's Tower of Babel, who boast of their vision being crystal clear and who desire to control the narrative by limiting it to their one possible right interpretation. They often aren't even aware of the questions their subconscious wonders and wounds are expressing. But what if those who have been subjected to white male supremacist power dynamics have a self-awareness and neighbor awareness that those at the top of the empire do not have? And what if that may lead to having better questions across a spectrum of power dynamics? While Answers in Genesis plans to build a new Tower of Babel to bask in their apologetic certainties, what if biblical interpretation by Africans or black theologians who have been on the underside of colonialist power and segregation might provide a range of more liberating lenses for interpreting Babel? What if biblical interpretation by contemplative women on the outside of evangelicalism's theological tower might provide a wider lens for interpreting Babel? And what if biblical interpretation by black womanist theologians might provide insight about the beauty of diversity in the story of Babel that the white men at the top of the tower miss? Lamb is correct that the story of Babel illustrates how humans can do great evil to other humans in pursuit of power. But we need to recognize how biblical interpretation is a wielding of power. And then we need to approach the Bible with a posture of opening it up rather than summing it up. Perhaps our varieties of questions will meet with the Bible's variety of questions and lead to the dismantling of power and to the opening up of hearts toward one another in unexpected ways. And I think as I look at the story of the ballroom, that is really the heart of where I think we need to begin reflecting, that we're not approaching this building of this tower, this making a name for ourselves, this plowing over sacred landscape and trees in order to build this massive structure to make a name for ourselves. We're not approaching that with the certainties of our political parties and accusations toward the other, but we're approaching it by understanding it within the context of how this affects those who are under the underside of power. When those who have billions upon billions of dollars in contracts with the government are given access to the powerful by giving even more money to this ballroom. That may seem like it has no effect on the poor, but it's giving the rich an access that those of us on the underside of the tower simply do not have. And when all of the attention is being paid to building this ballroom, suddenly we're not paying attention to the Epstein files anymore. And suddenly we're not paying attention to the hundreds of thousands and even millions of people who are dying because their food and their health care have been cut off. So let's approach this story with the questions and the concerns of those on the underside of the U.S. empire. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.